All right, everybody. We are going to be going over this question from your homework. There was a question that I wanted to do in class, an example that I wanted to do in class, which would have been a good, um, like, good problem to see before we did this. And unfortunately, we didn't have time to get to it. So I'm going to go through this and kind of explain my thinking as I'm going, and you'll get a chance to maybe make some sense of it before we have class again if you get a chance to see it. All right, so we are given that the two big angles, SYF and ZYB, are congruent. And what we want to show is that these little pieces here, SYB and FYZ, are congruent. And what you'll notice is the two big angles overlap, and they overlap this angle BYF. So if you try to make some sense of it before you do a proof, you probably think, okay, if the big things are congruent and there's this shared part in the middle, BYF, you can kind of subtract that away and you're left with the two smaller pieces. And that's excellent if you thought that, because that's going to kind of lead us into what kind of steps are we going to be using. If you're thinking, well, the big angles are made up of the two smaller ones, that's the angle addition postulate. We're going to need that. If you're thinking, well, there's this middle piece that they share and we have to subtract it away, we're going to use the subtraction property of equality too. So sometimes the way we think ourselves through a proof actually is how we're going to do the proof. Okay, so we're given that the two shapes are congruent. The next step, which was given for us, says the two measures are equal. And without maybe knowing why we need that, we should be able to see, all right, if I go from shapes to numbers, that is the definition of congruent angles. Now, why do we need that step? Because we are eventually going to be doing some subtraction, and I can't subtract shapes. I have to subtract numbers. All right, step 3 says that SYB plus BYF equals SYF. The two parts make up the whole. That is the angle addition postulate. It says that the two parts make up the whole. All right, the clue for step 4 has quotation marks under step 3. So that means I'm also using the angle addition postulate in step 4. Step 3 talked about the big angle SYF. So step 4 is going to talk about what SYF is congruent to, ZYB. So in step 4, we are going to say that the measure of BYF plus the measure of FYZ equals the measure of ZYB. Okay. Now, step number 5 says we are substituting on 2, 3, and 4. So if you've written down step 4 correctly, you might be trying to look, how can we use substitution? Well, step 2 has SYF on the left side. There's SYF in step 3. And ZYB on the right side, and there's ZYB in step 4. So if the green equals the purple, then I can take those two sums from 3 and 4 and set them equal to each other, because we are going to be substituting the sum SYB and BYF in for that side in 2, and the sum BYF and FYZ into that side for 2. So I'm going to try my best to write this somewhat neatly. Step 5 is going to be the green part, the measure of SYB plus the measure of BYF is equal to the purple part, the measure of BYF plus the measure of FYZ. That's step 5. That says that those two sums, the sums of those parts, are equal. Okay, maybe you've gotten this far on your own and you're wondering where to go, because step 6 didn't give you any clues other than step 7 was the statement we wanted to prove, angle SYB congruent to angle ZYF by the definition of congruent angles. Perhaps that would let you work backwards and say, if I got that these two angles are congruent by the definition of congruent angles, the only way I get that is by saying that the measure of SYB is equal to the measure of FYZ or ZYF. Where does that come from? Well, going back to step 5 says SYB plus BYF equals FYZ plus BYF. So what I have here is like, I'm adding the same thing to both sides in an equation, and I can just cancel them out. So I'm adding BYF to both sides in an equation, and I can just cancel them out. What lets me do that? That is the subtraction property of equality on step 5. And if you go back to when we were talking about how is this proof going to work, or why does this proof make sense, we were saying, hey, they share this overlap angle, and we have to subtract it away. That overlapping angle is BYF. That's what we subtracted away in step 5. So we're left with the two numbers, SYB and ZYF, their measures are equal, and then step 7, the angles are congruent.